I received an email question that came in from Dan about the weather got cooler back home, and all of a sudden he's finding he's got muscles that are tight that he hasn't felt all year long. What's going on? Dan, thank you so much for the question, and let me explain. When a muscle is warm throughout the summer, it may have some tightness in it, it may have some trigger points in it, but you're not going to recognize it because, yeah, it might be a little bit tight, but as you start to exercise and it starts to warm up, it immediately elongates. So when something gets cold, when anything gets cold, law of physics is it's going to start to cause it to shorten up. It's going to become smaller. So now a muscle tissue that has a trigger point in it, I always want you to use an analogy. If you're holding onto a rope and I'm holding onto one end and you're holding onto the other and the rope is nice and tight, if somebody comes and pushes on that, it's going to either pull the rope out of my hand or pull the rope out of yours. In this case, every muscle has an origin and an insertion, right? Bicep origin, inserts long head of biceps up in the acromion process. So the idea here is when a muscle becomes cold, it shortens up. That's why you're noticing that when there's a temperature change, the muscles start to shorten up and you get a newfound muscle discomfort, pain. Trigger points seem to be a little bit harder to get out because as things become colder and they start to shrink up, a trigger point is a pain spasm little knot in the tissue, and that is the source of a future muscle tear. It almost becomes the weakest part of the muscle. So what we're trying to avoid is make sure that muscle tissue is pliable, whether it's hot or cold. I see this quite often. People will say to me, Rob, I don't foam roll anymore because it doesn't hurt. And I always want to remind you, the reason why it doesn't hurt is because you've been foam rolling. There's a big difference there. So keep that in mind. Unfortunately, when it becomes cold, it does tend to bring a little bit more attention to our tight muscles and trigger points. Foam rolling, even when you don't feel like there's any discomfort or pain, it's still doing its job of suppressing and elongating the muscle tissue. That's the beauty of a foam roller, because anything that puts direct pressure on the tissue causes dilation. Warm, nutrient-rich blood goes into that area. The muscle naturally relaxes and gets longer. Remember what we say, a muscle that is able to be at its fullest length without any tension in the tissue will always produce higher rates of speed, higher and longer, I guess we could say better endurance. So you can go faster, longer when a muscle is at its full length because it has 100% of its contractile strength. So foam rolling has a multitude of benefits, but when you get into these colder times of the year, any place in the body where maybe we've neglected or didn't realize that something was tight, that's why it's rearing its ugly head at this time of the year. So just like Dan did, if you have any questions, send me a DM, send me a direct email. You can reach me at contact@coachrob.com. As always, thank you so much for watching these videos.